Without question, Vladimir Horowitz was one of the greatest pianists to ever live. But what if you had the chance to play for him, not in a concert hall, but in his own living room? In this interview, you're going to hear from somebody who actually did. And not just one piece, he actually was asked to play all 12 of Liszt's Transcendental Etudes on a 24 hours notice, while sitting on Horowitz's own sheet music just to have his bench height be a little better. But this isn't just a story about nerves and legends, it's about true artistry, tone production, imagination, interpretation, and the kind of mentorship that you just simply can't find in books or most other YouTube clips. If you care anything about the deeper art of classical piano playing, this is a video you won't want to miss. So let's dive in.
So, well, here, let's do a formal introduction. This is Mark Salman, who I studied with basically 10 years ago now, I think. It's been a while. And then I did another year with him, kind of preparing a bunch of Chopin. Most of you know I prepared for the Chopin competition. And we did some study there and some other things and all that. And you all here because you know of his connection to Horowitz, which not many people have. I think that is something very special. So, yeah, we'd love to just get to know you a little bit more and open up the floor here. I plan to do like kind of Q&A style with you here, but before I do, is there anything that you would like to share about yourself or kind of fill us in before I get started?
Oh, well, not necessarily. It depends what people want to find out. They can look at my website and at least find a little bit about my, basic, studies and what I've been doing, and certainly take a look at my, videos and recordings that are online too. And I'm certainly planning on getting a lot more stuff out there because I have so much live recorded stuff that I'm, working on trying to get out there. What else can I, say about myself? The music that's always been closest to me is Beethoven. I've done the cycle of the 32 sonatas, several times, and something that's been close to me ever since I was a kid. I, love Liszt and have probably played as much Liszt as maybe there are a few people who've played more than I have, but not very many. And I've played large percentage of all of his original music, and you admire his music immensely, and then of course play everything else in the repertoire too, and enjoy doing that. And I guess my approach, the stuff that always has always resonated with me throughout my sort of career, was some of the old time pianists who were active before World War II, these students of Liszt, Moritz Rosenthal or Frederick Lemmon, someone who's not so well known. Listening to the recordings of pianists of that era has always resonated with me. I remember Joseph Hoffman, the great pianist of the first half of the 20th century and close friend of Rachmaninoff. I think when I was 12, some way or another, my mother heard that this guy was important and saw a record of him in the record store and brought it home. And I remember just listening to it and thinking, what? You can play like this? Music can sound like this? It could be so vivid and imaginative and changeable and humorous and all of that. And as I say, that sort of thing has stayed with me, for my entire career. And there's things that have resonated with me. So, and then of course the chat that I got a chance to kind of meet the last of those, pianists like that Horowitz was kind of like an amazing thing, amazing opportunity.
Yeah.
Years ago.
Well, and about that, I mean, if we get to nothing else today, that's the question of the hour. So I would like to know, like, what was it like to study with Horowitz? And if you could kind of start, like, recap the story. I heard actually from Benjamin about like the 12 Transcendental Etudes. And I never got it from the horse's mouth the whole time we worked together. So I'd love just kind of what led to that.
Well, I guess the way that it happened, David Duvall, who I'm sure is a name that some people probably run into, have written some important books on piano and music, and he was a professor at Juilliard for many, many years in the piano literature. He had run one of the major radio stations in New York, WNCN, which is long gone now, but he had an interview show, and he interviewed every major pianist that you could ever imagine, multiple times over many years. And he had done some series of many interviews with Horowitz over the years, and had actually gotten to know him. And Horowitz always was sort of a reclusive guy. He, we all know of that he took long sabbaticals from performing because he found performing difficult. He was nervous. He felt pressured. He always wanted to do his best. And he wasn't someone who was out in the world and socializing with people. He kind of kept to himself and for long periods of time. And so I guess he met David Duvall, and David Duvall is this guy who knows everything about piano and everything about pianists and music. And here's someone Horowitz could just talk to, and he would know exactly what he was talking about. And so they got to be good friends. And at this point, I'd been at Juilliard. I had graduated already, but I loved David Duvall's class because he had this sort of connection to the world of the piano and all of these pianists, and kind of was able to communicate this sort of thing, this excitement of the amazing variety of music for the piano. And he was one of these sort of spontaneous professors who I think he never had any idea what he was going to say before he walked into that room that day. And then he always came up with some incredibly interesting or brilliant or spontaneous insight because he had so much knowledge. And I loved going into that class just to experience. It's I don't know what's going to happen today. And it was always something really interesting. It gave me so much food for thought. And so I would come in and visit him afterward.
My friends, if you have been enjoying this video, make sure to join my free piano community, the Key Learners Piano Club, to have access to this entire 90-minute interview and regular mentorship from me. Click the top link in the description below to join for free. I'll see you on the inside.
After I was not in the class anymore. And he, of course, appreciated me because he would ask students to kind of play stuff in the class. We're talking about Beethoven sonatas or Bach Praise and Fugues or Chopin pieces. It's oh, well, we got a class full of pianists. Can someone demonstrate this piece rather than playing just some recording? And if you could, as you could imagine, a bunch of pianists at Juilliard, all staring at each other. It's everyone was afraid to play in front of all these other pianists. And so it was kind of a funny thing. And I always just sort of volunteered to play anytime, anywhere, because if you want to be a performer, you just have to play. It doesn't matter who is looking at you. You just have to get used to it. And I thought this was an amazing opportunity to kind of get just huge amounts of performance experience. And then my feeling was, oh, if everyone else is too chicken to kind of play in front of everybody, no one's going to criticize me for going out there and maybe missing a few notes or whatever. Anyway, so he liked me as I was so curious about the music for piano, and I brought in all sorts of unusual music of Liszt and whoever that he didn't know, and he appreciated that so much. Let's see. Anyway, so we knew each other, and he liked me. So he, at that point, Horowitz was doing through one of his more reclusive periods, and he tended to have David Duvall over for dinner once or even twice a week. It was almost his only lifeline to the world at the time. And Horowitz, even though he, again, wasn't a sort of public person, and he never really, or rarely taught formally, he always felt that he had some obligation to pass on his knowledge and legacy to young people. And so every once in a while, that idea would go through his mind that I need to do this, because he learned that from Liszt, who Liszt taught all of the pianists of the next generation for free, and they could all come from all over the world and come to his master classes in Weimar or Budapest and take part and learn from Liszt for nothing. And that sort of idea was still in the air. Horowitz had inherited that, and he also felt that he had this obligation to his good friend Rachmaninoff to kind of pass on the knowledge and legacy that he had learned from Rachmaninoff. So this came up, and he asked, and with David Duvall's kind of encouragement, he sort of said, well, could you bring some of the students from Juilliard to play for me, and I could give them some lessons. And so this came to be, and David Duvall thought, well, I'd be one of the people he'd be interested in meeting. And it so happened that David Duvall, as a challenge to me, asked me one day, or I basically announced to the class one day, because I was so interested in Liszt. He says, Mark is going to learn and play all the transcendental etudes for the class. And my jaw dropped. It's like, what? I'm not going to do that. Where'd you get this from? And I said, well, and I asked him, well, how about, maybe I'll do all the years of pilgrimage or something like that. At least you get a few easier ones mixed in there. And he said, no, you're going to play all the transcendental etudes. And I sort of like, well, didn't say anything. I left. And then I kind of went home and sort of thought about it. I'm like, and said, well, maybe I'll open them up and look at them. And I'd probably play one or two. And I started reading through them, and then I was captivated by how great these pieces are. And I realized, oh, if you played them all as a set, there's this giant arch to be an incredible experience. And it just, the idea just captivated me. And then I told him, yeah, I'll do that. And so then I worked very, very hard for 3 months and practiced nothing else but those. And then I was ready to play them for the class, which I did.
So you got them all in 3 months?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So that part I definitely... I'd be lucky to learn Fofele in 3 months.
Oh, well, I mean, so Fofele took 3 months. I just was working on all of them during that time.
Like that one's the one you do the whole time, and then
right. I remember coming up with 4 of them that I said, okay, these are the 4 that are the hardest. And I can't remember, what did I decide? It was kind of like Mazeppa, Fofele, Wild Hunt, and the number 10, the F minor.
Yeah, those were my 4.
I decided those are the ones that take the most practice, so I divide the time, so I spend more time on those, and and then somewhat less. Some of the others are quite difficult, but they're a little shorter and have fewer difficult things in that. But you organize your practice, and you manage to do all these things.
Yeah, how much planning did you do like ahead of time, or did you kind of like figure it out as you went?
I think I figured out as I went, because I didn't have any hard deadline. I think I probably wanted to get it done by the end of the school year or whatever to bring it in, but it wasn't like I had a hard deadline. But I just was so excited by this project, the challenge of it. It's like, it wasn't something I'd thought of. Oh, I just never considered it, and I sort of thought, oh, I could do this. Let's push myself and do that. And I think that's what David Dubal's idea was like, oh, there's a level, he has a level of technical command and learning stuff that like he doesn't even know he had. I don't know how old I was, 23, 24, something like that. And I'd spent an awful lot of time with Beethoven and Schubert and, stuff like that that's not necessarily technical stuff. It's really spiritual and emotional, and takes a great deal of focus to kind of live with that music and to kind of do it well, but it's not so much the technical stuff. And even though I was captivated by Liszt, I only had played some amount of it at the time. And so I think he realized this would push me into understanding I could do so much more with all this really, really difficult repertoire, which is actually what it did. And ever since then, I think I always over-challenge myself. I never let myself have a program that doesn't have a whole bunch of overly challenging pieces on it, but that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing. That was me when I met you. It was me before I met you, and it's been me ever since. It's like the the Rite of Spring solo transcription and Ligeti etudes. Like I always tell everyone in the group here, you've got to be pushing for the next level, and that then makes everything under it easier in retrospect. Like you don't just master, you go way beyond, and then your brain has to adapt.
Absolutely right. And as I always say, you're either getting better and growing, or you're going the other direction. So there's not really much choice. You got to keep expanding and getting yourself to do more. And absolutely that it makes all the stuff that's been in your repertoire just get better, because you attempted this thing. And even if it's not successful, that attempt at the super difficult thing, you're better, and it's easier to do all the stuff that you're more comfortable with. Anyway, so after this point was when he had at some point after that, I don't remember how long, I'll say 6 months, after maybe a year, I don't know. He, told Horowitz about a few students who might come to him, and he said he was interested in that guy who plays all the transcendental etudes. And then suddenly I get this thing that, I'm trying to remember exactly how this was. I think that I got a call from, so what I had to do is I had to write Horowitz a letter, introducing myself, and I had to give him a picture, and all this, because Horowitz was not going to just meet someone. He had to like get used to the idea. The person had to write him very formally and politely asking to meet, and he wanted to know what the person looks like and all of that. And I sort of thought, well, nothing's going to come of this because Horowitz never meets anybody, and sure. And so I'd totally forgotten about it. And then I get a call from David Duvall, and he says, guess what? Great news. Horowitz wants to meet you. And like, when? He wants to hear you play all the transcendental etudes. And I'm like, oh, when? And he says, tomorrow. And I sort of am speechless and I say nothing. I'm like, can't he wait a week at least? And he says, and David Duvall says, just practice. Click. Hung up the phone. And then later on, call me back.
Talk about a challenge.
Yes. And so I sat down and so I practiced, and luckily I do retain music pretty well in my fingers, especially if it's something that I've worked really hard at. And so I was able to get them back pretty well. And so the next night I had to meet Horowitz at 9 p.m. since he had a very, very late sort of schedule. And I think it was after his dinner. And so I took the train in from Connecticut, where I lived at the time. And I got up to his townhouse on Madison Avenue, but just like between Madison and Park Avenue, if I remember, and on 95th, or I think it was 95th Street, Upper East Side. And and I got there early, and I remember I walked up and down the street because I just wanted to ring the doorbell at exactly 9 and not come earlier or not be late or whatever. And so I nervously walked up and down the street. And then I'd ring the doorbell, and they had a maid or somebody who let me in there and took my coat. And of course, I had to be dressed formally in a suit and tie because if you met Horowitz, you had to be very, very formal. And I took my overcoat and put it in the closet, and then led me upstairs. And I kept thinking, oh, I hope for some reason he decides he doesn't want to do this. I was so nervous. I just want to get out of this thing, playing transcendental etudes for the greatest pianist in the world. It's like, oh my gosh, could anything be more intimidating? And I kept trying to tell myself, well, maybe he's going to be not in the mood to hear anything. Let's hope that, and maybe I'll just get to meet him. And I remember being led upstairs, and there's Horowitz sitting on his couch with his wife, Wanda, and there's David Duvall there. And it's like, yeah, I recognize Horowitz. And I just walked in and introduced. And Horowitz, just started talking to me for a while and asking about my studies and asking me about music, and talking about various subjects. And sometimes he launched into stories about various things. He had a lot of interesting things to say. I will say that in this sort of format, he was very, very much the way he is in any of the interviews you see of him. This funny mixture of formal but sometimes very playful.
Yeah, he can be like almost like childish.
Yeah, childish. And with these little moments of that, I always remember a time when at some point in the middle of the whole thing, he sort of got up and announced, I have to go pee-pee.
Really?
And he walked over to the bathroom.
The greatest pianist.
And he went pee-pee. Anyway, and if I can remember anything more about exactly what happened, other than obviously I was very, 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 very nervous and kept thinking, okay, I hope he just wants to talk. I hope he doesn't want me to play. But way too soon, he says, well, here's the piano. Maybe you would like to try it. And then he said, it wasn't his concert piano. It was a concert piano, a concert piano that was lent to him by Steinway. And he said it's kind of heavy. And I remember I sat down, to play, and the first thing I played was some obscure piece by Liszt that he wouldn't know. So I figured, okay, he won't have anything to say to me about this. It's a very easy and short piece. I wanted to get a feel for the piano. And it was a little piano piece in A flat. And he asked about it. He was very curious about it. And I told him all about where it was. And he was very, 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 very interested in it. And then he asked me to kind of play a transcendental etude. And so I think I played like the first one, that's sort of like opening one, which I got through okay. And then he asked me to play the 10th etude, by which time I realized, so I'm 6'2", and I tend to sit with the bench usually put all the way down. So I sit lower than most anybody else I know. But Horowitz he had a fixed flat bench that was, I guess, for his designed for his own technique, and it was way too low for me. And I didn't know what to do to say. I wanted to sit higher. I just wasn't going to tell him anything. So I sat down playing the 10th etude, which was frankly the one that I was probably the least comfortable with. I think it's the one that's the most fingery and takes the most sort of practice to kind of get back into your fingers. A lot of the others that are more chordal, you have a little bit of room to kind of fudge stuff a little bit, but that one's just very, you have to be very honest with your fingers. So it's probably the hardest one to play in this situation. And so I played it, and I was sitting too low, and I was nervous, and it wasn't going very well. And I was missing some things, and there were sloppy runs and all sorts of things. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to be let out of here, as soon as I'm done. But at least I got to meet Horowitz, and I talked to him. I had this experience. That in itself is enough. This is great. And so I finished playing and feeling quite ashamed of myself. And he said to me something very reassuring. He says, I see you can play the piano. I could see that you play very good. I think he understood the situation. Young pianist coming in playing he knew that he was Horowitz. He knew that was pretty intimidating. So he was actually very kind to me and didn't say anything about that. And then I timidly sort of said, oh yeah, well, I think the bench is too low too. Can we do anything? And so he had on his piano these various piles of music that he might have been reading through or looking at. And so he took piles of music and put it on the bench so I could sit up a little bit higher. And
is that where you got your carpet rugs idea?
Actually, not really. I just have the collection of carpets, and now it's like a convenient thing.
That's how we changed bench height at his lessons. Is just pile on a couple of carpets, take a couple of carpets off.
Yeah, I have a big collection of antique Oriental bag faces and carpets from the 18th and 19th centuries, and Turkmenistan and Persia and all that sort of my hobby to collect them. And they're all strewn around my studio. I don't know if anyone probably can see something behind me on a wall. I don't know. Yeah, I think there's some that sort of show up behind me. But my way of changing the bench height, because most people want to sit much higher than I do, is just can pile carpets on, and then when I want to sit down and demonstrate, I can throw them on the floor. And it's better than screwing the benches up and down, and give yourself tendinitis. But anyway. But I also kind of think I'm one of the few people who has that dubious distinction of having sat on Horowitz's personal music. It doesn't seem respectful, but I mean, there we go.
His choice, it sounded like.
Right. One claim to fame I have. But anyway, I played, and then because he was kind to me and said, you can play the piano. Well, that's a giant Horowitz, compliment from Horowitz. And so I felt much better, and then I played a few more etudes, I think including Fufale and Wild Hunt and the second etude, I remember. Possibly Chasnez too, I can't remember. But I played those, and he was actually, believe it or not, actually complimentary to me and liked my playing and felt, oh, you're different than some of the others, because I had more of this sort of, romantic old-time pianist, sort of style and flair, and I think he recognized that in me, and that was the thing obviously I admired, incredibly in his playing. And so again, he was really, quite complimentary, and I ended up feeling quite comfortable. And he asked, "Oh, can you play something lyrical?" So I had the nerve to kind of like play. He said, "How about maybe Petrarch Sonnet 104," which wasn't really in my repertoire, but I knew it pretty well and I could play it. So I thought I'll just play it. And he liked it and gave me some pointers and lessons on, on how to play the tone at the beginning of the melody and exactly how to balance some things. And then he sat down and he demonstrated for me a bunch of things. And again, in the transcendental etudes, he gave me various pointers in various places in them. And then he actually even played for me some other pieces he was interested in. He was interested in this Prelude on Weinen-Klagens Orgensagen that Liszt had written. It's not the big set of variations, the big 20-minute piece, but a little prelude on that motif from the Bach cantata. That's just a 3 or 4 page piece. And he really liked that piece. So he sat down and played that for me. And I can't remember we had this interesting going back and forth about interesting music and talking about some of the Liszt transcriptions. And some of them we talked about, he said, "Oh, I don't know that one. Can you play a bit of it for me?" And so I remember there's a little bit Meyerbeer transcription from Les Patineurs, the skaters, which is a ballet in one of Meyerbeer's operas that's very obscure. And I remember playing a little bit of that. He said, "Oh, I know the opera," but he didn't know that Liszt made a transcription on it. And so I found it so interesting that the Horowitz was so curious about stuff. And I always tell everybody that of all the, sort of say prominent or famous musicians I know, Horowitz was the only one who was willing to say, "I don't know something," and show me that. All the others would pretend they knew everything even when they didn't. Occasionally, even in ways that were sort of embarrassing because they talk about a piece that's obscure. It's like, "Oh, actually, I know that, and I can tell you have no idea what you're talking about." But I always appreciated that sort of curiosity. He's not given credit for sort of his, it's not like he was this, musicologist or whatever, but he did have a real curiosity about music and wanted to know, and he read biographies of the composers' lives and studied what their lives were like and what their thoughts were like and tried to put that into his playing. And I definitely got that from him when he was there. I remember he was, around this time, he was recording the Mozart concertos, that famous recording of the concerto that he did at the end of his life. And he was reading all about Mozart. And I remember he wanted to tell me some quotes that he liked that Mozart had written in his letters. And he took out his wallet out of his breast pocket. And he had one of these big sort of folding wallets that was like this big. And he opened it up and he took a piece of paper out and unfolded it and read me all these quotes that he had copied down from Mozart. And again, that he was always involved in thinking about that. I remember one of the quotes that he said was something along the lines of, because he's thinking about what size orchestra he wanted to play with. And Mozart described his perfect orchestra, and he said, as Mozart said, it was like 2 of the regular sized orchestras he was able to get at once. And it was perfect for his music and the fullness and richness of this extra big orchestra, which basically was the size of the modern symphony orchestra. And he says, "You see," and Horowitz said to me, "You see, Mozart said he liked this." He says, "This chamber orchestra stuff," he says, "I think people just want to make more money." He waved his hand disdainfully about that.
Yeah, because they're supposed to be historical.
Yeah, it's supposed to be historical at 20 strings, and Mozart said he wanted 40 strings. And it's in Mozart's words in his own writing. I mean, I won't say there isn't something to be said by hearing the Mozart on the chamber orchestra, but still, it's not invalid to hear it in a full orchestra, since Mozart said he specifically said he liked that sort of sonority. And so again, we just had this very interesting and free kind of interchange of ideas, and it was really quite encouraging and interesting and inspiring. And he would tell stories of old times and old pianists and all of that, and give his impressions of them, really quite freely sometimes.
So was this this is a lot of interaction? Was this like one time till 4 a.m, or did you get to meet him several times?
Probably till sometime around midnight, maybe. So I'd say we spent about 3 hours together.
Yeah.
And I actually only got to meet him one more time, and we had another very, very similar time. Remember, I played him the Schubert C minor sonata, among other things. And again, we had very interesting talks. He showed, that time he showed me, he was recording some of the Mozart sonatas, and he would show us at the beginning, "Oh, look, here's where my phrasing is going." He was exploring different ways of phrasing the slow movement, and he would play us these various ways that he did it. And said, "Oh, look what I've discovered this week." And he also was looking at, he was working on possibly learning the Chartis Macabre of Liszt. No, not Chartis Macabre, Chartis Obstiné of Liszt, a very obscure late piece. It's something like this. There's the opening, just in case anyone knows that.
I love that one.
But he did those little transcriptions of Liszt pieces where he kind of magnified everything, like the Second Rhapsody and some of the other things. And so he was actually working on his own version of that. And so there was music score on his piano that he was writing, his version of it. I don't think he ever got to finish it, but it was something that he was working on, which I thought that's so interesting. Here he was 86, and he was so sort of creative and vital and had all these interesting projects. And then he
I'm
played
curious
in,
about the transcriptions too, because obviously he has a lot of things he played around with. How much of it was written down versus do you think he just kind of improvised a lot?
actually, I don't know. Because I mean, there are plenty of people now who have played them, but I think for the generally, they were always have been people taking them off of his recordings by ear.
Yeah. Yeah, that's happening more and more.
Yeah, as I remember, I did the Midsummer Night's Dream, the whatever is the Midsummer Night's Dream transcription, and I kind of took it off. And the Stars and Stripes Forever, I took off his recording when I was 17 or 18. Which I remember back then, the only way to get it is you couldn't even buy that. I had to go to the school music library, and I figured out, and you could only listen to it in reference. And I remember I figured out a sneaky way to take it out in reference and hide it under my books and walk out of the library with it and take it back to my dorm room and record it on cassette. And then I recorded it and played it at 16 RPM so I could get it at half tempo, so it helped. And then ran back to the library and returned it to the library. I had to make this whole plot about how to do that.
It's a whole organized crime just to hear something you could play on YouTube.
Yeah, except way back then, that couldn't happen.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And I remember the working in the library at the time was like the person who was working and checking everything out was a student who who we were friends. I liked her, she liked me, and so I knew she wouldn't really look at me too carefully. So I went to make sure when she was working. And then of course we got married 10 years later.
Oh, that was Sarah? No way. Oh, that's crazy.
That funny.
Oh, amazing.
So anyway, picked a time when someone would be well disposed to.
This was MIT?
This is actually at MIT.
Okay, yeah, because I thought that's where you meant. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. Anyway, that was a story of getting the Stars and Stripes Forever transcription. But as I say, I think mostly that's how people have done them. They've just listened to them over and over and taken them off of the recordings. So I haven't heard if there is somewhere in an archive Horowitz's versions of them. I don't know.
Yeah, now it's not hard to get. I've got the famous Hungarian Rhapsody #2, and stuff like that. But you can tell it's not an official publish. The notation is sloppy, and there's always a few things that are wrong in it. You can kind of retranscribe what's already been transcribed.
Yeah, but at least it's a nice start. So we actually can play all of these things now. Anyway, I was thinking about where else I was in my story. That the other thing that was interesting was he played for me another piece that he was working on, a late piece by Liszt called Jadis, Jadis, and it's from the Christmas Tree, the Weihnachtsbaum album that Liszt wrote in the 1870s. A very obscure but very lovely little piece. And in this piece, if I remember the beginning of it, it's something like this. It's the melody, something like that. And it starts with this very spare. And then you get the real theme. More Lisztian. And Horowitz was of the school that he felt that these late Liszt pieces, sometimes they were just little sketches that you had to elaborate. And so he was playing his own version of, and he had some other little thing he put in, and then he had these little interjections he had put in there, and I think he had added something to this, some chords to put with that to kind of fill it out. And so it was this little version. I think he was thinking of recording it, and he never recorded it, except that it did turn up on one of these, I don't know what, like collections of pieces. And he actually played it in an interlude during one of his recording sessions at the end of his life. And he just played it through, and all those people around talking and and whatever. There's all this noise, but it got recorded because they left the recording equipment on. And so and we thought that, I always thought that, oh yeah, this is lost, like his performance of this piece, it's not out there, but there it is, recorded in an interlude in a recording session. So years later, it was like really kind of cool to see that. It's like, oh yeah, that was the thing I remember from those little interjections he added to the piece. I remember those from when I met him, and he was working on that at the time. And then he asked me to play it, and I played it for him in the regular Liszt version.
Yeah, and how much do you recommend that kind of thing? Because obviously in competitions and things like that, they tend to not allow that. But I feel it's more in the style and the spirit of those composers.
Well, certainly we know that Liszt did stuff like that. I think you have to kind of look at like what's the spirit of every composer and research that kind of thing. Because some composers you shouldn't at all, and some you could do some, and some you could do all sorts of wild stuff in. And you know, with music today, you know, perhaps the audience is smaller. People are less interested in it. Younger people are less interested in it. So, I mean, it's hard to say because there's this giant internet audience out there. But I think one of the things in classical music that'll make it more vivid for people is if you knew that people might improvise something or do something sort of appropriately spontaneous that's appropriate to the music. I think that would engage audiences and make people think, oh, I'm going to go to a concert. I don't know quite what's going to happen. But Liszt, we know, did stuff like that all the time. It's recorded in his students' diaries at the end of his life, how he would play some piece, like some section of some piece for the students to demonstrate it, but then he would then go through that part again with a sort of improvised, totally changed version of it. And they were all incredibly enchanted by that.
Quick heads up, I just cut a 45-minute section of the interview between what you just heard and what you're about to hear. If you want to hear the entire 90-minute interview, simply join my free group, the Key Learners Piano Club. Link is in the description, and then you can get access to the full thing as well as mentorship from me. Look forward to seeing you on the inside.
Do you feel differently about Horowitz from when you first knew about him versus after you worked with him?
Oh, well, definitely. Like as a young person, I went through various incarnations of what I felt about Horowitz. Again, when I first came of age and was first learning piano, it was a time, especially in the New York area, and among critics, of this high seriousness. And even though Horowitz everyone would flock to his concerts, doing that kind of virtuosic playing was like kind of looked down upon. You know, we wanted that sort of text kind of playing where you just play the notes and it's very self-effacing. And that was what was considered good, and Horowitz was like, oh my gosh. And so when I first grew up, I just assumed that's what I should think because I was 12, 13, and that's what the musical society around me told me how I should feel. And then somewhere, actually it was, David Duvall on his WNCN had a thing with a whole bunch of Horowitz performances. And I just happened to tune into it. I listened to these recordings and I'm like, oh my God, this is like utterly out of this world. It's utterly fantastic. And I felt slightly guilty for taking so much pleasure in it. You know, when I heard things like the Stars and Stripes and the Mendelssohn Midsummer Night's transcriptions, which are so spectacular, I was just blown away by them. But also his performances of like serious stuff, of Schumann, of Chopin, of Liszt. It's like, that's just the best performance of that piece I've ever heard. There's just nothing else like it. And so then I got to really love him, and I was lucky enough to hear him live a number of times, and to this day they are the most just amazing live performances I've ever heard. They're sort of like, this gives me this standard of like, well, this is what a musical performance can be. This sort of mesmerizing thing for every moment where everything was like, how could he do this? But everything was just incredibly engrossing and transporting, and there was nothing. And every piece had that same different kind of amazing sort of feel to it. And so then I was really so taken by Horowitz, and of course as a high schooler you want to kind of play the Sixth Rhapsody as fast as he did, and then you get yourself exhausted afterward. And then you go off to college, and then you sort of get back into that sort of like urtext, like we just by the, you must play just the notes in the self-effacing style, and then you start to be influenced by that again, and then move away from that sort of Horowitzian ideal. And it didn't help. And of course, it made it easier too. It's like, well, I mean, half the reason why people want to play in a non-Horowitz way is because they can't play in his way. It's just too good. And so if it's unattainable, you start thinking, it's like, well, I don't want to go that way. It's unattainable. But then I met Horowitz at a time when I was probably coming back a little bit towards him because of those transcendental etudes. And then once I met Horowitz, that totally accelerated my return back to that kind of performance. Actually, I really wish that I'd played for him. It'd be nice if I could have played the transcendental etudes for him several years later, because my earlier performance that I did then was very much influenced by the contemporary pianism, and was probably much more, I'll say, conservative than what I would have done in the years since. But then he really, really caused me to go wholeheartedly down this other track, and I'll probably never really looked back since. And frankly, a very, very difficult track, which takes many, many years of thought and study and experimentation and performance and learning about yourself and learning all sorts of pianistic know-how, because to be able to at least go down my own version of whatever that track would be. It's an awful. But also one of the things that he said to me that was really meaningful is he said, in piano playing there are two things. There's mechanicus and there's savoir-faire. So mechanicus, in his colorful way of talking about it, is just the mechanical digital playing. You can play your Czerny, you can play your etudes, you can play all your notes really well. He said mechanicus, there are many pianists that were just as good as he was in their finger technique. And he says some that are exceeded, who are better than him. He says, but in savoir-faire, that know-how about how to get an effect, all the tricks, he says that's what he felt he was better than everyone else. Which is true. He could
that's fair when you actually are.
And it's absolutely true. I mean, he could get these colors out of the instrument, these balances, these colors, these dynamics that no one else I've ever heard could do. And yes, there are plenty of pianists who could play that piece as accurately and as fast as Horowitz. But to get those colors, but also the emotional progression, the excitement, that sort of breathless, jaw-dropping sort of virtuosity. I mean, that was a savoir-faire thing rather than the actual notes, even though he had to play the notes incredibly well too. But also, I think what he had also to say on that was that I don't think he had to practice gigantic amounts to kind of get his effects. He could just kind of play it through a lot of times and almost spontaneously command himself to kind of do something. Whereas he
had that imagination in the inner ear.
Yeah, but also it's the connection between his brain and his fingers was different. Like a lot of times, pianists we have to practice for years, and you finally get this thing into your motor things, and you can play it very, very well. But he could kind of have this spontaneous, okay, I could change this entirely on this moment if I decide to. And that was something I remember. After that point, I decided I had to figure out how to be able to do that more. And I almost felt I had to kind of rewire my brain-finger connection to allow that.
My friends, congratulations on watching this interview. I'm sure you found it just as exciting as I did. If you actually did make it this far, it means you love classical piano playing and everything about it, the ins and the outs and everything in between. So if you would like to take the next step and learn all that you can from these artists of high caliber, join my free group, the Key Learners Piano Club, in the description below. I have interviews with not just Mark Salman, but I actually bring on a concert pianist every single month, and you can go and watch previous archives of various discussions all along the same lines. Looking forward to meeting you on the inside, and I'll catch you in the next video.